Monday, March 26, 1827. The north wind blows and snow billows through the air. Thunder claps above the empty streets. It is a day that will go down in history. A fine gentleman stands alone in a doorway. His carriage awaits, but he does not move. He waves the carriage on. Tonight, the gentleman will walk home. Like many in Vienna, his eyes are full of tears. Ludwig van Beethoven has died. 3 days later, spring had arrived. The people of Vienna flooded into the streets. They had come to pay their respects to the man who has written such beautiful music. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 9 priests blessed the composer's coffin, and the funeral procession left Beethoven's house. The pallbearers wore rose bouquets and white silk scarves. They walked with the coffin through the vast crowds so dense it took an hour and a half to go 1 block to the church. There, in a service lit with candles, the people of Vienna said goodbye. The schools of Vienna were let out that day. If you would look carefully, you might have spotted in the crowd a boy with a serious face. His name is Christoph, and he is my nephew. And there was a time when he came to know Mr. Beethoven well. It was not a happy time in Christoph's life. His father had died. He was only 10 years old. I was a young man myself, a student of music in Salzburg. Christoph lived in Vienna. He wrote me letters about his troubles. As you will hear, my little nephew had a lot to say.
Dear Uncle, something terrible has happened. A madman has moved into our house. Do you remember when Father died, Mother decided to rent out his offices upstairs? Well, she has done it, and Ludwig van Beethoven has moved in. Every morning at dawn, Mr. Beethoven begins to make his dreadful noise upstairs. Loud poundings and howlings come through the floor. They are like the sounds of an injured beast. Mother says I mustn't blame him. He's deaf and can't hear the noise he makes. But he wakes up the twins and they start their crying. They cry all day. All morning, Mr. Beethoven carries on this way. After lunch, he storms into the street. Uncle, you should see him setting out for the afternoon. He hums to himself. He growls out tunes. He waves his arms. His pockets bulge with papers and pencils. The children run and call him names. Later he comes home. Sometimes he's soaked with rain. He tracks mud through the hall. Other times he doesn't come home at all. Or long after the house is quiet for the night, he comes in, pounding his way up the stairs above our heads. Uncle, you know I have not seen you for some years, but I hope you will remember me. I beg you to tell my mother to send Mr. Beethoven away.
My dearest Christoph, I arrived home last night to find your letter on the table in the hall. Do I remember you? Of course I do. and I'm so sorry you're finding these months so difficult. I should tell you I have received a letter from your mother as well. As you know, she is worried about you and wants you to be happy. She assures me that Mr. Beethoven is peculiar perhaps, but certainly not mad. Christoph, Mr. Beethoven will settle in soon, I'm sure. I know that life will be more peaceful before long.
Dear Uncle, now everyone on the street is laughing at us. I opened the front door this morning to find a crowd in front of our house. They were looking up at Mr. Beethoven's window and laughing, so I looked up too. There was Mr. Beethoven. He was at the window, looking at a sheet of music. Uncle, he had no clothes on at all. It was a dreadful sight. Sometimes people stop outside our house, thinking they will see Mr. Beethoven. But if anyone asks, I say that he has moved away. Dear Uncle, Mr. Beethoven has a friend named Mr. Schindler who visits almost every day. He always says, "Poor Mr. Beethoven, he is a lonely man." You know that Mr. Beethoven is deaf. When he has visitors, they write what they want to say in a book. He reads their message and answers them out loud. He has a low and fuzzy voice. Mr. Beethoven's eyes are weak as well. When he works too long by candlelight, his eyes begin to ache. He sometimes sits alone with a cloth wrapped around his head to keep out the light. He sits there, not seeing and not hearing, in his chair. He's in a world by himself, Uncle. There is no hour of the day when I forget that Mr. Beethoven is in the house. Dear Uncle, 1 week has passed since I last wrote you, but life is no calmer here. At lunchtime today, Mr. Beethoven's housekeeper came plunging downstairs. She had her hat crushed in her hand, and her face was covered with tears. Mr. Beethoven had told her she is fired. She had used a page of Mr. Beethoven's music to stuff his boots. I think of all the places in the house, I like the outside best. I can be alone there and get away from all the noise inside. But on this day, even the stray dog outside was making his pitiful voice be heard.
My dear Christoph, today I received 2 of your letters at once. I will admit Mr. Beethoven does not seem to be an easy guest. Perhaps I can help, though, by saying that as strange as Mr. Beethoven seems, there are reasons for the way he acts. You see, all day long he is hearing his music in his head. He doesn't think, perhaps, how very strange he sometimes seems to us. We hear only his wild noises, but he is hearing beautiful music, music he will someday share with us. They say he is working on a new symphony. It will be his 9th.
Dear Uncle, Today, Mr. Beethoven appeared in our doorway downstairs, and it was as if a bear had dropped in for tea. He's not tall, but he's wide. He has long white hair flung around his face and shoulders. His forehead is big. His eyes are dark and shiny. He had come downstairs to fetch his new housekeeper. Her name is Caroline, and she told Mother she's from France. She said the Viennese ladies aren't very fashionable, and she was telling us other such very interesting things when Mr. Beethoven said, "Please come upstairs." I've been thinking, if Mr. Beethoven and his housekeeper did leave, surely we could find someone nice to live upstairs. The rooms are large, and Father's patients always talked about the view of the river. Father used to carry me down by the riverbank on his shoulders. Mother says it's dangerous to stand close to the water. But she says I am old enough now to go down there if I want to on my own. Dear Uncle, I have now seen with my own eyes that Mr. Beethoven is mad. I will tell you the story in the hope that you will do something. Last night, when I was getting ready for bed, I happened to look up at the ceiling. I noticed water collecting there. As usual, Mother was busy with the twins, so I climbed up the stairs and crept along the hall to Mr. Beethoven's room. I peeked in the door. He was standing in the room with no shirt on. He had a jug of water in his hands. He was pouring the water all over his head, right there in the middle of the room. He shook his head like a wild animal, and all the time stamping his feet like he was marching or listening to a song. You should see my father's study. Do you remember how tidy he was? Well now, there are papers lying everywhere, on the floor, on the chairs, on the bed which isn't made. There are dirty dishes stacked up, and clothing crumpled on the floor, and another thing, he has been writing with a pencil on the wall. Dear Uncle, do you remember I told you once about a stray dog who was whining on the street? He is a small and spotted dog, and I have found a way to stop his crying. Today, he seemed quite pleased to share my sugar cake from lunch. This afternoon, a carriage pulled up, and the driver handed me a card. It said, Prince Karl Lichnowsky, and I saw on the back of the carriage the prince himself. He called out to me and said, "If Mr. Beethoven's door is closed, please do not disturb him." Mr. Beethoven must be a terrible man if even a prince is afraid of him.